Go ahead, David. You
All
were
right.
talking about faculty engagement with educational policy.
Yeah, right now, faculty are the front line. They are the ones that are really sort of, bridging this gap for higher ed institutions. And right now, from what I've been able to observe, kind of being the fly on the wall, talking to a lot of different, organizations, institutions, is there's still kind of it's still kind of a mixed bag. There's a lot of faculty who are really progressive about it. There are those who sort of just acknowledge its existence but aren't sure they want to use it, and then those that still just don't want to use it. And when I've talked with them, I think the reasons are a lot of it is they just don't fully understand, the extent or the implications that it really can have in their coursework, in their
Right.
curriculum. And I think also the other piece is, it's either there is some of them are just afraid, and some of them are just I don't want to deal with it, and others are I don't know if this is the right thing. So but I do believe that it all comes from a good place. In other words, they take their teaching responsibilities so seriously that they don't want it to interfere with the students learning. And
That's a great point, Dave. That is a huge point. Everybody's looking at it from that perspective of the student. So let's kind of start there. We're talking about educational policy, and AI has shaken up educational policy. And I'm Dr. George Hanch. I'm here with Dr. David Hatami, and you just did something that's kind of very cool. Even before we jump into this conversation that we've been having, you just got conferred your EDD not too long ago. Big, huge congratulations. And
thank you.
how'd you do that, man? Tell us about it.
It was a long road. It took a lot longer than I thought it was going to. I'm sure I'd have it in the bag in no time. But life happens, and you kind of roll with it. It took me about 5 years to complete my doctorate. Actually, I just finished in December of 24, so it's a very recent
Ooh.
conferral. The ink is still drying, as they say, but it's a good thing, and very excited. While I've been finishing up my doctorate, I've spent about the last year building, my consultancy, EduPolicy.ai, and really, it's actually been a really interesting experience because what it's done is it gave me a chance to kind of start to talk to all these different institutions and colleges out there and
Right.
universities. Where are they? What are they doing? And what's really fun is this whole thing started from when my 14-year-old came home from school one day, and he told me that he never had to do homework again
Never
because
had to do it again.
yeah,
Okay.
because
This is
because his
interesting.
because his
Let's
friends showed
go.
him Chat GPT, and now he said he thought he didn't have to ever learn anything again. So
Outstanding. I like that mentality.
so I'm like, that's a nice idea. It's interesting, and so let's talk about it. But what makes it crazy is it is a literal true story. And actually, I kind of did an about face from my doctoral rabbit hole, and I started like looking into this. And I started thinking
Oh,
like who's talking to these kids? Who's talking to the faculty? Who's talking to administrators? And it's actually kind of the whole concept of my consultancy actually started. But it's really intriguing because what I have learned, I've been learning every day. I learn so much, and there's
cool.
this huge spectrum of universities and institutions out there that some of them are really super progressive in what they're doing. And I was talking with one yesterday that they've already created an AI graduate program and an undergraduate program. They're using AI to automate their admissions process. And so there's
Yeah.
it's crazy. And then you have other institutions that are still taking this very slowly. And I think a lot of them have started, like AI task forces, because they recognize that, the struggle is real, as they say. And what they're doing is, a lot of schools, they acknowledge it, they know that it's there, but it's like, what do you do with it? Like who's going to be, heading this up? Who's going to be, actually, forging ahead in the new directions? So there's a lot of challenges out there. And I think there's the hardest part is we still don't know what we don't know. The technology is changing so fast that what was relevant a couple of months ago we kind of solved that problem and now we're on to something new. And I think that's really what makes this such an intriguing and ongoing, new issue in education and even in the corporate sector.
I really love that because it's ushering in an era where people have to be able to make iterative decisions, knowing that things are going to change. So we have to make those small iterative decisions, whether you're a leader, whether you're in education, uh, whatever it may be. We have to be able to do that, know that things are changing, and then adjust. So it's bringing in. So I'm kind of curious to see. Okay, some institutions aren't real good at adjusting. Will they be able to adjust and become a part of it, or are they going to just basically break? I'm kind of interested to see that. So, what is AI's role in educational policy?
You know, AI, in terms of educational policy, AI is kind of everything all rolled into one, because what we're doing is we are finding new ways to educate the workforce. I mean, if we really stop and think about it, it is always going to be about the student, and it's always going to be about workforce readiness. And I think this is the caveat that a lot of people struggle with, because on the one hand, we want to make sure that they're still getting their critical thinking skills in, that they understand how to solve problems. We want them to be ready and able to to manage the technology for the jobs of tomorrow. Okay, so
Right,
I think
right,
that's really where the dichotomy is. And in terms of the policy, right, so these are the rules that we're following, these are the rules that we're crafting. And I don't know if any one institution has solved this problem yet. I think it's sort of a long-term problem that we're working on. And what I realize the most is, if we don't do something about it, if we don't have a consistent set of rules, that's where we're
mhm,
really going to run into problems. Because, it's like, if the faculty, let's just say, for example, if only half of the faculty are enforcing an AI policy and the other half really aren't, then it really doesn't doing the students or the institution any good, right? Because it's like half of a police force enforcing the laws on any random given day. It is kind of hit or miss, and it doesn't really make a difference. So, as far as the actual policies themselves, they are they need to be designed specifically to acknowledge that AI exists. Institutions need to embrace AI. They need to actually, instead of fighting it, there has to be an ongoing battle to make it part of the mainstream. And what really needs to change is curriculum and assessment, because
right.
if we don't change curriculum and assessment, then what's going to happen is, you know, we're going to be using the same curriculum. And if a student can use Chat GPT for it, and a faculty member uses, hypothetically uses GPT to correct the assignments, then what are we doing? Why are we here?
What are we doing? That brings up a great point because at LAPU, we right now we're currently creating several new courses and we're revising older courses. But we took the stance of we're going to use AI in our classrooms to help create active learning scenarios. So they're engaging with, like, one that we're doing is a history course where they're literally having a conversation with a historical figure. And we use Nectar's the company that we partner with to make all of our assistants inside the classroom. And that is crazy cool because we actually had to come up with policy that stated we're going to have this forward moving momentum with AI.
Yeah, yeah. There has to be,
So
the infrastructure has to be in place.
the infrastructure, yeah. So how do you think, so with the advent of AI, is it changing how we need to look at policy as well? Do we
You
need
know,
an iterative approach for policy also? What's your
it
thoughts?
it has to be, because the technology is going to keep changing. And if what's going to happen is, so if we establish a policy for a specific technology, and that technology changes, or a student comes up with a novel approach to utilizing the technology that we hadn't thought of, then there has to be some mechanism in the iterative policy that allows us to sort of grow with technology. And it's, while it's ambiguous, at the same time, it needs to be specific. And I'm purposefully kind of keeping this sort of at a very 30,000-foot view and
Mhm.
almost in a philosophical sense, because, methodology is, one thing, but, and that's part of the more constructive um, approach, if you will, to creating, specific policies for specific institutions, because every institution is going to have a different idea of what's acceptable and what's not. And therefore, it's really hard to have standard, boilerplate template. I get that request a lot. It's like, well, do you just have a template I can fill in? And it's like, I would love to give you a template, but it's not really going to serve you the way that you need to, because, you can put everything down on a piece of paper, all right? And
Right, right.
I know many institutions that have AI committees, and they have, started to actually draft policies and, put all these, little iterative pieces together. But at the end of the day, we also have to acknowledge there has to be a sense of governance that allows for things to change and, to kind of to grow and evolve, much like we have a constitution in our country. There's room for amendments, there's room for changes, because time changes things and technology is going to change things. So let's position ourselves to not set ourselves up for this proverbial chasing our own tail with technology, right? You
Right,
have
right.
students using ChatGPT, faculty using Turnitin, and then students using some technology that beats Turnitin. And so we kind of create this cyclical policy application of software where, the tech companies are making all kinds of money, but, is it really helping students? Is it really helping
So,
education? Are students really learning? You know,
I was having a conversation with our president, Dr. John Reynolds, yesterday, actually, and we were talking about artificial intelligence. And he made a great point. He said a lot of people still see it as a technology issue where it's all about organizational transformation. It's
yeah.
not a tech issue. It's a whole organizational. Yeah, it's a whole culture issue.
Yeah, it's transitioning from an analog culture to a digital culture is really what it is. And much of that is, mindset. Much of that is the buy-in from the student base, from the faculty, from the administrators. And let's not forget about staff, right?
Right.
The registrar's office, the financial aid office, the career services office, all of these instrumental parts of higher education's, ultimate purpose. They're not faculty, they're staff. And while ancillary, they're still critical parts of the infrastructure. And how the information and how the data is used, matters. And this is sort of why, I advocate for a kind of an umbrella. um, I'll use the term university in a broad sense of, institution, a broad university policy, and then, smaller policies for each specific department, because
Oh,
academic
okay.
because academics is going to have a different set of data or information that they're going to be using and applying in each specific course. And so there also needs to be specific guardrails for how that information is managed from a data protection perspective, from a bias perspective. Financial aid has a completely different set of information. It's all students' confidential financial information. And where this is all leading up to is this is going to start affecting accreditation requirements. I'm still, researching, some of these effects, in terms of from an accreditation perspective. And this is where what's in my opinion, is really going to start to change. And that's when it is no longer going to become yeah, we'll get around to it. It's going to become, oh yeah, we need to do it now. And this is sort of, part of the iterative changes that we need to be preparing for.
I actually worked for a person who had it was a round disc, small round disc. And he said, to it, he said, here's your round to it. Let's get around to it now.
Fantastic. It's fantastic. It is. It is. It's exactly right. But I do think most institutions, most universities are very aware that this is an issue that's not going away. I think that realization hit us, after GPT kind of hit that 1 year anniversary. So I think it was like a year
Mhm.
and change back. And then it was sort of this kind of like, I almost want to say this. mass pandemonium in a sense. It was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And now I think everybody is sort of at a point where, okay, this isn't scary anymore. We know what this is. We
Right.
know what we have to do, and we have a task force. We have an idea of how to manage this. But what we need to do is to figure out how we can do this, how we can not have students, the sky shouldn't be falling down every time a student uses ChatGPT to write an essay. It should be part of the curriculum so that that piece is managed, so this doesn't become a constant academic integrity issue. It's like, how do we change the curriculum so that we don't have to deal with that? And that is by simply embracing the technology and reverse engineering the assignments.
Right.
I'm going to give a plug to a good friend of mine. His name is Mike Kentz, and Mike very much preaches about grading the prompts. Don't grade the essay, grade the prompts. So it's constructive chat prompt engineering to build an
Mhm.
assignment or an essay, but because the student still has to go through this process, right? They have to go through a
Right.
critical thinking process to build those prompts. So as long as we can teach them how to think, how to problem solve, I think we should recognize that the pedagogy that we are establishing is going to change with technology. Um,
100%.
then does it matter so much? Yes, they need to learn how to write. Yes, they need to learn how proper grammar and punctuation. These things need to happen, but we also need to recognize the technology. We need to start teaching in a different way. And
Right.
that's kind of up to individual instructors and instructional designers to help them figure out what that looks like.
I literally wrote an assignment 2 days ago that had somebody interacting with our Spark, we call it. So that's our AI assistant within the course
Yeah.
from Nectar. And part of the assignment is and you could click history, download the transcripts that you made with the bot, with the assistant. And part of the assignment is turn in those transcripts so we can see and rate the conversation that you had.
Yeah, exactly right. That's
And
exactly right.
that's it hasn't gone live yet, so I'll let you know how the students enjoy it, love it or hate it. We'll do like Cold Stone, like it,
Love
love
it.
it or hate it.
Hate it. Yeah,
So
exactly.
we'll do
It's
that, a
perfect.
hate it instead of a
Perfect.
yeah, yeah,
Perfect.
yeah. So that'll be interesting to see. So some people are. So you see some people just embracing it, and that kind
Wholeheartedly.
of brings us to data, right? If AI is great for using massive amounts of data and coming up with predictions, whatever else it may be. How do you see that data ability and the insights it can give people now that prior to AI, we were not privy to these insights? How is that reshaping policymaking?
It's going to change the frameworks that we use, because if we don't, change the framework, we're going to get a different result. And we have to shift towards a more, I guess you call it, a human-centric AI, because there's so many implications, whether they're ethical, social, whether it's just humanitarian. And we need to have a standard set of guidelines. No matter what we do, there has to be this consistency that I was talking about.
Right,
uh,
right,
and we take care of that through through regulation, right, through policy, where there is a consistent set of rules, where we have frameworks in place that enable us to kind of change as we go, right? So we can, because the data is changing everything. It's the analytics where, I mean, it affects every industry. It affects education. It affects healthcare. It affects, um, you know, I don't know, pick an industry. It doesn't matter.
sure.
Government. I mean, everything. And being able to actually manage this data more responsibly has actually never been more critical. And working together, and there has to be a lot of transparency. And I think that's one of the issues that a lot of organizations really struggle with is, this sort of transparent nature of what we allow and what we don't allow other people to see or have access to. um, you know, it's just so critical. And I think if we have an AI ready infrastructure, if we have buy-in for all of the different cohorts, allowing the faculty to have a voice in how this technology is used, allowing the students to have a voice in how this technology is used and embraced. Um, I think that's how we're going to get that collective buy-in that administrators are going to need to take it to the next step.
Interesting. So what are some conversations or some real world examples where you've been able to connect with different administrators and faculty, all the folks you're talking about?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yeah. So all the data-driven pieces, it's affecting everyone. What are some real world examples that you've had conversations with about people actually using the data, or any other examples that you can give us about bringing this into a policy perspective?
Yeah, like admissions is a great one because, obviously when students fill out, their application, there's a lot of sensitive data there, and being able to, augment and go through all of this information in a way that isn't going to violate their privacy, because I know we're all concerned about that.
Mhm.
Um, I've seen it utilized um, in academics, where there are specific algorithms written and bots written for specific courses. I know you do a lot of that, but what's really crazy is that all of this stuff here is it's changing so fast, and I'm going to keep saying that because it just keeps changing in ways that I think we don't even know what we don't know on some days. And I think that's part of what makes this kind of interesting and kind of what makes it crazy at the same time. um, but I think we have to focus on understanding that there's some risk involved, and in terms of actually um, risk as far as what we're up against. But if we handle it correctly, we can certainly make a difference.
And that's the big thing, because there's risk. I would even argue that there's greater risk in trying to ban AI from an institution. That's probably a greater risk than
Yeah,
looking for ways to actually deal with, wrestle with, and come up with something a little bit more uh, inclusive isn't the right word, but something a little bit more
universal.
favorable for the students, so they
Yeah,
can learn these new skills that they have to have.
yeah. The workforce readiness is actually a big thing, big part of this, because if universities are struggling with allowing it, and then they go out into the workforce and don't have those skills, that is going to be a problem for the students, because right now the students are facing this dichotomy of, let's just say half the faculty are encouraging it, half of them are discouraging it. Excuse me. So that kind of puts the students they get stuck right in the middle, and there's
Right,
really no
right.
place for them to go. And they want to use it, but if they're afraid to use it, that doesn't help anyone. So by having an actual policy where the university takes a stance and says, yes, it's okay to use it, but for, in this particular course, you can use it for this, this, and this, and in that course, you can use it for that, this, and this. When you break it down, it gives the students clarity. It gives them the clarity that they need. The faculty
Right.
don't have to feel like they're always, policing something if there is a clear-cut set of rules. Not only do we have policy issues, but then there's also the ethics, which is the personal use, the personal self-management of how we utilize the technology. That also matters. And I think being able to teach the students to use it effectively is really critical. And here's why. This is the first generation of digital natives that are going to be learning that this technology exists. So if we teach them correctly, they will take this proper ethical approach into teaching the next successive generations. I have two boys, and neither one of them don't know a world without internet, 4K
Right.
TV, Xbox, AI, Chat GPT. They don't know a world without that. Whereas you and I remember what the world was like before these things. The internet
Right,
wasn't
right.
until I was in college. So, if we take our teaching responsibility very seriously, we owe it to our students to teach them to use the technology correctly, appropriately, ethically. And by doing that, they are in turn going to teach the next generations the correct way to do this. Because if we don't, I mean, we all got social media wrong 20 years ago, and we saw a lot of negative repercussions because of it. I'm not saying it's a bad
Yeah.
thing, because it really is an amazing concept to be connected with people around the world. And as we become more connected, we need to recognize that there are certain rules that go along with that, rules of engagement, if you will.
Right. And we have a huge responsibility in academia to teach the ethical use of artificial intelligence. It's not burying our head in the sand will not help. It will make things worse. Just like you said with social media, we should have been out in front of that, teaching different ways, just in general, on how to interact, everything else. But that responsibility of ethical use means that we have to use it. And we have to figure out what is ethical. We have to answer these questions. We can't just say no, because that simply doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think it's an ambiguous answer, and it feels kind of intangible in a lot of senses. But
Hmm.
we all understand intrinsically what it means to, handle something the right way and the wrong way.
Right.
And while we can craft words and we can craft policies that give us guidelines and frameworks, and it's more than just a buzzword. It really represents the infrastructure that we need to make this happen. And again, without going into like minutia, which I'm kind of trying to again keep it at a very 30,000-foot level here, um, that how we break that down and being able to have some built-in flexibility, because we need to understand, as I said, the technology is going to change. There are going to
100%.
be every it seems like every other day there's a new version of is being released of some GPT or some bot, and it's a constant. And we're at the point where we're running out of data to train AIs on, because it feels like we've trained them on as much as we can, and we're constantly seeking new sources of data. And it's kind of crazy if you think about that, but I think we're slowly getting there if we haven't already.
And that's interesting, because you do see it. There's a new tool coming out every day. We're just inundated with new tools. So it's just circling back. It's about that organizational culture, not the technology, on how we approach and create that ethical framework and what is ethical. And what I love about that is you mentioned change. It's all about change, right? Everything's constantly changing.
Yeah.
And change, if you look at every theory of learning, the word change is in there somewhere.
Hmm.
Like a behavioral approach would be, a change in behavior, right? That one's very blatant, but that word change goes in every learning theory out there. And kind of brings to mind that if change is in every learning theory, we should be really good within our higher education institutes to change ourselves,
we have to
right?
be we have to be nimble. And unfortunately, most of academia moves like molasses in a Maine winter, and there is just this resistance to change, and trying to make anything go fast seems to not go fast. But
Fast and
it,
slow.
but what's really interesting though is in I was talking with this institution yesterday, and one thing that I really noticed when they were explaining their processes is they broke down a lot of the institutional silos, or departmental silos. Um,
Okay.
and I think that's a big part of what needs to happen, because you can't streamline anything when it takes so much time to go from department to department to department. Why can't those departments all talk together once a week?
Right.
And I think by doing that, you actually create more flow, and there's less resistance, and also it also enables more opportunity for discussion of important topics.
Right. So with all this iteration and discussion that simply has to happen within each organization, what do you kind of see as future trends and some opportunities that may?
The future trends. you know, and on a lot of levels, we don't know what we don't know. And I
Right.
mean, let's just
Yeah.
let's just call it what it is. But I think what it's going to do is it's going to allow us to do things that we couldn't do before. And I wish I had a crystal ball that I could just say I strongly think that this is going to happen or that's going to happen, but I'm not sure we really know. And by we can follow the breadcrumbs and we can get some ideas that we're going to get into more of a personalized learning situation,
Mhm.
that it's going to, and it's already affecting the economy in terms of certain positions are becoming more automated, which obviously reduces the need for human capital. But at the same time, we also have to make sure that we're keeping a close check on the technology. And none of this is new. This is all pretty, I think this conversation's been had many times, many different ways, but making sure that we keep the technology in check, I think, is going to be a big part of that process as we move forward. Um, yeah, it's hard to say,
Really, it could go anywhere. I've been looking a lot at augmented reality lately, kind of
Yeah,
diving in, learning about that. There's some amazing things that we're going to be able to do very shortly with not a lot of money to do it.
yeah. I mean, I know this sounds kind of crazy, but my son was playing some driving game with the VR goggles the other day, and it was crazy. I'd never seen that before, and it was like first person experience. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah,
Um,
it is.
so just knowing that we're on the forefront of all this, we are the stewards of making sure that it gets taught correctly, and I think that's really what we have to look out for. I mean, I have methodologies, for implementing this within a higher ed context, and I think if we can do this in a very organized fashion, I think that's where it's going to help institutions, start to, use the technology right, because we can't put the genie back in the bottle, as they say.
Right. The genie's not, the toothpaste will not go back in the tube.
Nope, it does not.
So you brought up the fact that it needs to be a very methodical approach.
Yes.
And I think that's brilliant because we need to use data and a little bit of precision to kind of weed out any of the predisposed thoughts that some people may have, because there's people that think it's the greatest thing in the world all the way to it's being the worst thing in the world and a whole bunch in between, right? So
Yeah.
we really need that uh, method to approach building that from a data centric perspective.
Data centric, but I would also say a human centric, because what happens, we
Point,
can't
good
we
point.
can't get lost in the data, but we also have to remember that it always needs to be checked by a human approach. Because the applications are, they're going to start changing the policies and the way that we look at things, whether it's
Mhm.
healthcare, whether it's transportation, uh, even public safety, just all of it. And
Right.
so,
So wait, let's stop. Let's talk about public safety for just a second because this is kind of blowing my mind. So
yeah,
everybody listening has probably heard of the trolley project, right?
yeah, yeah.
Where you have your, it was came from the 1950s or something like that, I want to say, but you have your hand on a switch, a trolley's coming down a track, and you have to either let it go and it's going to kill somebody, and whoever that is explained, and but if you pull it, it's going to kill a certain some people on this side as well, and then each group of individuals that will be harmed and killed by it is defined in the different trolley projects. So we literally are in a position with self-driving cars and AI automation where we have to legitimately make moral decisions of the trolley project that we never thought would come to bear back in the 50s,
Yeah,
which
no,
is crazy.
it is true. And I think that's almost why it almost, when I think about the ethics, I almost think of it in a Socratic way, in the sense that it's there's almost, we've created this digital mind, and it's, but it has these real human implications. And just knowing that we have to start, you know taking accountability for our decisions, and no decision is an easy one, and that's the hard part. And when we talk about, we always try and choose the path with the least harm. We know that no path is perfect. There's always going to be some, there's consequences that are intended and unintended, no matter what we do. No matter how good our intent. And being able to recognize that, we're going to make some mistakes along the way, is a part of this process. But at least if we go into it knowing that we're trying to do the right thing, I think that's also a big piece of this puzzle. And just by
Okay.
raising the awareness, making sure that when people are building, when I could say this, so a lot of organizations, and they're all excited to build a bot and to apply it. They want to deploy it, they want to build it and deploy it, and they want to go. And I would argue that sometimes it's better to go slow to go fast. In other words, take the extra time to build a policy around it, to build some ethical frameworks around it before you deploy. Only so that when you do deploy, you can do it with the least amount of harm, least amount of harm that you could possibly have.
Yeah, and that's interesting. So we have to build in, even from a societal level, a certain amount of willingness to change and adjust, move
Yeah,
backwards, move
yeah,
sideways, move diagonally, however we need to move to
yeah.
make this thing effective.
I mean,
Wow.
it benefits us in so many different ways, in so many different industries, but at the same time we also need to be able to just to simply balance it and temper it with some responsible behavior, I think, is kind of the simplest way to frame it, in a nutshell, as they say.
Yeah. Well, Dave, this has been an amazing conversation. Do you have any final thoughts for our folks out there?
you know I think the best thing that I can say, and I've covered it a lot, is just being aware of what we're doing when we're doing it, I think is the key. And knowing that we are very much at a crossroads of, making sure that our behavior is done the right way is a critical thing. So just keep the
Right.
awareness up, know that we have to do the right thing. And as we do that, the chips will fall, hopefully in a very good place.
Yeah, they would. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hatami. Now, I love that.
Thank you,
So,
Dr. Hanshaw.
man, that is amazing. And if anybody wants to connect with him, it's EduPolicy.ai, correct? Did I get that
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
Okay.
Yes. My
Uh,
website is EduPolicy.ai. My email is admin@EduPolicy.ai.
and if anybody wants to connect with the AI Center, just aicenter.lapu.edu. And we look forward to chatting with anyone that wants to connect. And if you don't see this, just uh, edupolicy.ai. And then what was your email address again?
Admin at.
Admin at. Uh, Outstanding. So let's, if you need a policy, which you probably do, reach out and connect with David, because he's got a lot of fantastic insight. He's been doing this. Well, I guess we can't even say for an incredible amount of time, because it's only been a few years where we've been thinking through this, but for the entire time of AI, he's been thinking through it.
Thank you
So
for the
thanks, David.
opportunity, George. Thank you. It's a pleasure.